Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show. Today bringing you another really fascinating, a really cool individual who's helping to create a better tomorrow on many different fronts. And it's a really exciting area that we're going to be getting into today. We have the honor of being joined by Olivia Zetter, who is the head of government affairs and artificial intelligence strategy at National Resilience Incorporated, also known as Resilience, which is a first of its kind manufacturing and technology company that's ultimately dedicated to broadening access to very complex medicines and ultimately protecting the biopharmaceutical supply chains of the United States against disruption. The company was founded in 2020, and they're building this fascinating sustainable network of high-tech end-to-end manufacturing solutions to ultimately produce these medicines that are made quickly, safely, and at scale. Olivia has a really fascinating background, including extensive experience in national security, spanning diplomacy, defense, and development, along with various emerging technology issues. She's held multiple positions in government. Most recently, she was the director of research and analysis at the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, which was a federal commission that was established by Congress to examine the impact of AI on national security and defense. She previously served at the Department of State as a foreign affairs officer in the Office of Coordinator for Cyber Issues, where her work spanned a diverse range of cyber policy areas. She also served as a special advisor on transregional issues to the Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to Counter ISIS, where she coordinated efforts to counter terrorist organizations' financing and foreign terrorist fighter flows and external operations. While at the Pentagon, she also served as a special assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as part of the chairman's action group. Prior to her time in government, she worked in Washington and on-site abroad to manage stabilization and conflict management programs in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. She entered government as a presidential management fellow and is a recipient of the Department of State's Superior Honor Award. She's also a Truman National Security Project Fellow. Olivia holds a master's of public policy from Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, where she was a Belfer Student Fellow. She has a bachelor's in international relations from American University, and we are lucky to have her with us today. Olivia Zetter, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you, and I said at the beginning, you have an extremely cool background, I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I love reading. I'm sorry, it took a little while on that one, but I really like reading through the bio of folks like you. And I'd love to just hand things over to you for a little bit to just talk a little bit more about yourself to start things off. I mean, how you develop these broad-ranging interests in public policy and international relations, and how you got started off on this fascinating path. I think that'd be a great way to get going.
Sure, happy to. Well, again, it's fantastic to be here today and to talk to your many listeners about some of the kind of shared issues that I'm sure we're all thinking about in terms of how do we respond to the emerging challenges and opportunities that new technologies bring, as well as kind of new challenges in our global ecosystem. And so that's really, I think, one of the things that has been a common thread throughout my career that has taken me to a number of different places, as well as to a number of different subject areas. is this theme of how do we solve really complex problems, and how do we either bring people together and or leverage new technologies and innovations to enact a change, essentially. And I've always been interested in conflict dynamics. I think it might be the product of growing up in a house of psychiatrists and scientists that were constantly questioning and thinking about the world around them. I got very fascinated as a teenager, probably the only 15-year-old to become extremely fascinated with global conflict dynamics, and started learning more and thought it would be very interesting to learn how to solve these various conflicts in only the very naive way that a teenager can. But it really helped guide, I think, my career early on to get an education and background experiences that both put me out of my comfort zone and helped me think about the world around me. So started early out of college working in the development space, overseas somewhat in Pakistan and other places in the Middle East and South Asia. And then really loved thinking about strategy and policy and doing big picture thinking. And so that took me back to school and then over to the State Department, where I got to try my hand more directly at diplomatic work, and also start learning more about how emerging technologies come into play in both creating new challenges and vulnerabilities and threat vectors for our national security policy and national security kind of issues at hand, but also providing immense potential for opportunity. And so I had the incredibly fortunate opportunity to work with some amazing leaders across government on really both challenging but also interesting and important issues of how do we solve national security problems, ranging from our cybersecurity norms for state behavior around the world to how do we defeat a rising terrorist organization. And I really I've tried to learn as much as I can along the way. And so people often ask, how did I get to bio? Because I don't have a typical life science background, and my 9th grade biology teacher would probably be horrified that I'm working in the life sciences now. But COVID really, I think, opened my eyes and many others to the impact that a health crisis and health policy has on our broader national security environment and our foreign policy and our economic security. And it really made clear that these things are inextricably linked, essentially. We cannot have strength in our defenses and our offenses without health alongside that. And our nation and the global community can't thrive if health is not one of the fundamental things being addressed. And now we have seen very clearly for the first time in our modern era the impact that a large-scale health crisis can have. So when the pandemic hit, I was with the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and we were thinking about, we were essentially tasked by Congress to study the intersection of AI and national security, with a broad mandate to think about how this new technology will impact both emerging opportunities and threats for the future, and to tell the government how to respond. And as part of that, we looked at the nexus technology. So how will AI interact with quantum, with 5G, and of course with bio as well. And so I started thinking more about the bio space there. And after COVID hit, I was introduced to the team at Resilience and to Bob Nelson, the founder of Resilience. The company that they were starting at the time just felt like such an important mission to be able to join and serve from the private sector side to try and really fix essentially some of the core vulnerabilities in our broader ecosystem that prevented us from responding as effectively to the current crisis.
And let's talk about some of those vulnerabilities, because, and you mentioned some in the opening, and I think the United States public, obviously, in the last couple of years has been made aware of, hey, it's no good if my medicine is out on that ship there in the Pacific Ocean for 6 weeks, and it's no good if such and such medicine is only made overseas and we don't make it here anymore. What they may be less aware of is also this transition that we've seen in the pharma industry. So, the last 100 years or so is heavily based on these small synthetic chemical entities, but the future clearly is unfolded. It's all about biologics, these therapeutic products made from living systems. So we have our gene therapies and our cell therapies, our vaccines, our RNA therapeutics, and so forth. And I think the public may be not as much aware that A, these ain't easy to make, and B, the world's production capacity of them is quite small compared to what's coming in the pipelines of all the companies that are out there. Talk a little, we'll get into national resilience next, but talk a little bit about how you look at this diverse range of, I'm going to throw away, so these threat vectors of biopharma and how you sort of package them together when you formulate your strategy of national resilience.
Yeah, sure. So, I think COVID really highlighted some challenges within the biomedical community and biopharmaceutical community that hadn't come to light in the same way because the system was able to function generally as planned in what we would call peacetime, essentially. But as soon as a stressor was put onto that system, you saw our inability to make these more complex medicines, large molecule medicines that, as you say, are quite hard to make, and where the process by which you make them is really a part of the product itself. And we weren't able to do so at speed, at scale, or with some of the more modern medicines at cost either. So we had a challenge in our pandemic response with being able to make enough vaccines to go into arms as quickly as possible and to get the monoclonal antibodies and other therapeutics out the door as fast as possible. And as widespread around the globe as possible. And at the same time, on the industry side, life science discovery and the development of really innovative new medicines in these large molecule modalities, from cell and gene therapies to other uses of nucleic acids, has really outpaced manufacturing science. And so essentially you have these novel medicines being made through methods and in systems that have existed for the last 30 years. And so these two factors essentially came together as we were standing up Resilience in trying to think through how do we bring a manufacturing innovation to help it keep up with both our public health need as well as with the novel advances in medicine. And so to really inject both innovation and new thinking and new energy into manufacturing science and actual manufacturing itself as well. And also to really think about the future. Because the thing about kind of manufacturing capacity today is that it's It's physical sites, it's factories that often have very large footprints. And it also requires really high-skilled talent to be able to make most of these complex medicines. Yeah. And so that means that even if you built mass capacity around the world, let's say, to make vaccines for everyone, you wouldn't have enough skilled talent to operate the sites, and the sites as a whole would only be able to scale so much. Mm-hmm. So the current system essentially has a ceiling to it. And what's needed are new technologies and wholly new ways to make vaccines and therapeutics across these complex medicine modalities that change the game and allow us to leapfrog the current system.
And as we look now at National Resilience Inc., and I guess I love when these companies come out of stealth, especially when you have $800 million coming out of stealth. Talk a little bit about a little bit of the background of the company. You mentioned Bob Nelson earlier. You have an amazing suite of Nobel laureates and venture investors and so forth behind the company as well. But you're also, it's not just, I used to look at it and say, oh, they're making a bunch of factories, but you're doing a lot more than that because you're also involved in the regulatory side of things. You work with partners. Take us a little bit of background of sort of how the whole concept got set up and how sort of everything was put together while it was in stealth before you went public with it.
Yeah, sure. So, I think, as I mentioned, the company was really a product of COVID and the recognition that we need to start thinking about new ways of doing things. And so our founder, Bob Nelson, in his own words, got very angry at the pandemic and our inability to respond both domestically, but also across our global public health system. And so he essentially brought together this incredible group of experts and scientific leaders and former government leaders that we have both on our board and in our company and as our advisors to really think strategically about how can we do this better for the future. And what better looks like is essentially building more manufacturing capacity, while also thinking about how we can do it, as I said, wholly differently by innovating in manufacturing science and technology. And so the company itself, we provide manufacturing services to our partners that span everything from large pharmaceutical companies to small academic institutions. And we also think through how can we help bring some of the manufacturing expertise, the process and analytical development expertise that's needed to help scale a medicine from the lab bench to the bedside, to think through how can we make these recipes essentially better and able to scale faster and more effectively. So it's combining both the space and capacity to make these medicines with this expertise to think through, okay, how could we do this a little bit differently? And then at the same time, we are investing in manufacturing moonshots, essentially challenges that help us think through, okay, if we can advance manufacturing science in this way, then we will be able to really save both time and lives and dollars going forward by making it much easier to make these medicines.
And, the site mentions, obviously, these different classes, cell and gene therapies, viral vectors, vaccines, proteins, and so forth. A couple of months ago, you did a public announcement about a research collaboration with Harvard University. I think that this area was involved in, muscle stem cells or something like that. And this seemed a little bit, it was a very nice example of sort of this hybrid approach of things. It was more than you're just going to be manufacturing these. You're going to be working sort of with a wider mandate here, funding research at some levels, optimizing, once again, how you produce stem cells and so forth at different scale as you do clinical development. Could you just give us a little bit background on the Harvard relationship as an example of one of the deals that you work on?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we wanted to put effort into and think about as we stood up the company was how can we partner with other great thinkers across the academic space, small biotechs, and the scientific industry as well, to think about how we can both bring our expertise together really to advance innovation more quickly. So one of the things that we are doing is setting up research alliances with universities and academic institutions. And so Harvard is one of those. And under the alliance, we've established a 5-year research and development agreement where we are essentially going to fund faculty-initiated research focused on certain novel therapeutic and biomanufacturing technologies that have been pioneered in university labs. And also anticipate that innovations from these labs can be commercially advanced by spinning out new companies that Resilience can help form to expressly drive those technologies into clinical development and commercialization. So it's essentially thinking holistically and full circle about how can we form early alliances on technology areas that we think could be very innovative and help advance the field. And then how can we leverage Resilience resources to help bring those innovations into fruition faster?
Very cool. Very cool. And, as I mentioned at the beginning, Olivia, you have 2 titles. You're the head of government affairs, but also AI strategy. I'd like to break that out a little bit. As far as government affairs is concerned, are you going to be sort of working with sort of Operation Warp Speed 2, 3, and 4, God forbid, that stuff's coming down the line? What is government affairs encompass at specifically your role at National Resilience?
Yeah, sure. So our focus is really in helping to, again, bring kind of expertise, thought leadership, bring our scientists and deep experts in this space to serve as resources to policymakers, government officials, those thinking about how do we create better policy, regulation, guidance, legislation, and really right-size our pandemic preparedness ecosystem and our health ecosystem for the future. So our approach is to work very much kind of hand in hand to offer support where we can to government partners in thinking through these complex ideas and complex challenges. And then also our commercial team provides services just like we do to academic institutions and pharmaceutical companies, also to government should there be a product that needs to be made and Resilience has the capability for. So in that sense, we're really, I come from government, my team comes from government as well. And so our approach is to really put government first and to think through, okay, if we were back there, how would we want to be collaborating with industry and what types of knowledge and new learning can industry provide that can help us make better decisions or just think more thoughtfully and more critically about how we are developing the policies for the future.
Excellent. Excellent. And as far as being head of AI strategy, so we talked about your role with National Security Commission Artificial Intelligence. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the role of artificial intelligence as it pertains to National Resilience business strategy? At the same time, I know that NSCAI wrapped up in 2021, and there was some, bad conclusions that we're not really that prepared as a country on the AI front yet in terms of some of our adversaries there. But any other interesting AI learnings per national security that you could tell us about that aren't national secrets, and anything else you can get into on the AI front? That's such a timely topic for a show.
Yeah. So at Resilience, I have the wonderful opportunity to work with our incredible digital team to think through how we can apply these novel digital technologies to resilience and our work. And so in that space, we are essentially thinking about how can we bring we're thinking about this in a number of ways. One is how can we bring digitization and existing SaaS solutions, software solutions to the pharmaceutical industry and pharmaceutical manufacturing specifically. So how can we bring these enterprise solutions that already exist into our sites to help them stay at the edge of our digital era? And then how can we invent new solutions and leverage everything from machine learning and big data science to novel types of encryption and blockchain and different, thinking really, really big picture about, okay, there are all of these different technologies out there, and they're even more powerful for good when you can bring them together and use them in interconnected ways. So we are very lucky to have a digital team with deep experience in this space. And we are thinking through, okay, how can we have better, essentially, starting with visibility and learnings and data coming off of our systems that we can then learn from and translate that observability and visibility into prediction and then into optimization. So naturally, data is really the center of our universe, as it is the center of many of these new technological approaches. And we are just really thinking about how can we apply it to help us see better, think better, and act better for the future.
And as far as the sort of the next generation of STEM thought leaders that may be watching or listening to this episode, obviously, you know, as I do, I think you have an incredible background, really cool background. They have not, you know, disrupted ISIS financing networks or thwarted cyber attacks like you have. But what types of things are you personally looking at in terms of this next generation that's coming along that may want to work with you, that may want to join your team? What are some of the skills, the education that you're looking for, the previous work experience? Walk us through a little bit of that for the next generation.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, one of the things that I noticed moving from government into the life science space is that the sciences are often very siloed, where people become very deep experts, as they should and as we need, on one specific thing. But sometimes it is harder for different silos to be able to collaborate and work with each other and talk to each other because everyone is so focused on being the expert in their specific thing. And so I think particularly as people are getting their STEM education and going through their bachelor's and master's and PhD programs and working in their first labs, I would really encourage them to talk to the people around them, to talk to their colleagues who are working on different areas of research in their same space, but also to talk to people who are working in wholly other areas of research, even outside their scientific discipline. Because the more cross collaboration and cross-disciplinary learning that we have, I think that's really the sweet spot for creativity and for invention as well. So that would be my one kind of big piece of advice, is to have people just take a moment to look up and look around, and don't be afraid to talk to your neighbor or someone way across the campus about what they're doing and what they're working on.
And you mentioned some of the upcoming sort of the bleeding edge technologies at the beginning in terms of the quantum, in terms of the 5G and so forth. Other technological areas that you are personally, whether they're related to bio or, you know, tangential to it, what are some of the other hot tech areas that 2022 and beyond that you're personally most excited about in terms of the synergy and relationship to some of what you're doing in national resilience?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about this intersection of how biology and how the life sciences meet digital technologies.
Okay.
And how this can create a bio-revolution, essentially akin to the IT revolution that we experienced over the last 20 years. And so this is, a lot of these things are separate from resilience, but thinking creatively about, okay, what happens to our ability to discover and develop new molecules and new compounds when we have commercial quantum computing, and what happens to our ability to store and process and transfer data if we are able to store and process it using biological techniques, whether that's in DNA or in liquids. I feel like the world is really our oyster collectively right now, the way that these technologies are coming together to be able to think about really creative new solutions that I think could change how we live our day-to-day lives in the future.
Awesome. Olivia, where can we run into you in 2022? Are there conferences you're going to be at, talks you're going to be giving, other public announcements that you can mention for obviously those that are going to want to continue to follow you throughout the year and see what you're up to, as well as national resilience, but any other things happening 2022 that we should know about, specifically as far as Olivia Zetter is concerned?
Well, I'm still working out my 2022 travel schedule and which conferences I'm going to be going to, but I am so happy that it seems like we are getting back to somewhat of a semblance of normal life and being able to actually go to conferences in person. Once I figure out which ones I'll be going to, I will be sure to let you know, and hopefully I'll be able to see you and some of your listeners there.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question: when you're not thinking about all of these issues and securing our supply chains and protecting the country and everything else that you've been doing, what does Olivia Zetter like to do for fun in your off time?
That's a great question. Well, I love the arts, as you probably see behind me. So I am often reading or thinking about contemporary art, dabbling in making art. And, my alter ego is in Berlin at an artist studio, living there right now. So, so when I'm not thinking about new technologies and saving the world, it's usually some space of the arts, whether that's painting or photography or drawing, that is capturing my attention.
Awesome. It's a fascinating story and journey that you've been through, Olivia, and I'm going to continue to watch both you and the company and rooting you on moving everything forward in 2022 and beyond. Really great stuff. For everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode on the podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Olivia Zetter, Head of Government Affairs and Artificial Intelligence Strategy at National Resilience Incorporated, doing amazing things to ensure the future of today and tomorrow's medicines, such that they get to us quickly, safely, and at scale, protecting against future supply chain disruptions. Olivia, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there at National Resilience. And as we like to say on this show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you're doing. It's a really fascinating story.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad to be able to contribute just a little bit to that conversation and the many incredible conversations that you've had on this podcast.
It was a great time, Abby.